Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Friday the 5th of August. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is Scotland at 7. This evening I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 163 of the illegal Russian war of aggression. Then I will introduce our guest for this evening, and then together we will look at today's headlines from Scotland and around the world. Ukraine has ceded some territory in the Donbas region to Russian forces, with Kyiv acknowledging Russia's partial success in recent days. The Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky, has described the pressure his forces are under in the east of the country as hell. They have recaptured two villages near the city of Sloviansk, according to the Ukrainian General Alexei Hromov, but have been forced to abandon a coal mine regarded as a key defensive position as forces are pushed to the outskirts of Advitka. Russia may launch an offensive in the southern Ukraine region of Kherson to try to wrest back momentum from Kyiv and has been visibly building up forces, Hromov said on Thursday. Much of the region is already occupied by Russia after it captured areas at the beginning of its invasion, but Ukrainian forces have been developing a counter-offensive to try to regain territory. 3 more ships carrying grain have been authorised to leave Ukraine's ports on Friday as part of an international accord brokered to unblock grain exports and alleviate the global food crisis. The ships are bound for Turkey, Ireland and the UK. Ukraine will receive another financing package worth about £8 billion from the European Union by September, according to a German government source. Canada is sending 225 Canadian armed forces to the UK to recommence the training of Ukrainian military recruits, and that's announced by the Canadian Defence Minister. Since 2015, Canada has trained about 33,000 Ukrainian military and security personnel, but in February paused aspects of that training. 8 people have been killed and 4 wounded in Russian artillery shelling in the eastern Ukrainian town of Toretsk in the Donetsk Oblast on Thursday, the regional governor has said. The shelling hit a public transport stop where people had gathered. 3 children were among the wounded, said the area's governor, Pavlo Kirilenko. The NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg said NATO members are working closely with defence companies to ensure Ukraine gets more supplies of weapons and equipment to be prepared for a drawn-out war with Russia. As a US official accused Moscow of preparing to plant fake evidence to make it look like the recent mass killing of Ukrainian prisoners of war in an attack on a Russian-controlled prison was caused by Ukraine. And Amnesty International has said that the Ukrainian army is endangering the life of civilians by basing themselves in residential areas. That report has been rejected by the Ukrainian government representatives, who say it places blame on Ukraine for Russia's invasion. Now, we're lucky enough to be joined this evening by a regular contributor to our programmes, Linda Fabiani. Linda served as the member of our Scottish Parliament from 1999 until she retired at the Scottish election in 2021. When she retired, she was the Deputy Presiding Officer of our Parliament. Linda, good evening. How are you keeping?
I'm absolutely fine, thank you very much. Yes, good to be here.
It's fantastic of you to be giving us some time this evening, Linda. Thank you for joining us on Broadcasting Scotland. Our first story this evening is that the Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, who's backing Liz Truss in the Conservative leadership contest, has admitted that he does not know where Boris Johnson is, but insisted the Prime Minister is in constant contact with him. The Prime Minister and the Chancellor, Nadhim Zahawi, have been criticised for being on holiday on the day the Bank of England announced the biggest interest rate rise in 27 years and forecast that the UK would go into a recession lasting more than a year. The PM has been on holiday since Wednesday, and Zahawi is away with family and was not available for interviews in the wake of the Bank of England's grim predictions. Meanwhile, a leaked video shows Rishi Sunak boasting to Conservative Party members that he was prepared to take public money out of deprived urban areas to help wealthy towns, the New Statesman reports. The former Chancellor was recorded telling party members in Tunbridge Wells in Kent, "I managed to start changing the funding formulas to make sure areas like this are getting the funding they deserve, because we inherited a bunch of formulas from Labour that shoved all the funding into deprived urban areas, and that needed to be undone. I started the work of undoing that. Responding to Sunak's comments, the SNP Shadow Chancellor Alison Thewlis MP said, Rishi Sunak has been honest with Tory party members about his plans for the future, but not with the general public. Beyond the rhetoric, it's clear that regardless of who becomes the next Prime Minister, their goal is to make the rich richer and the poor poorer. So, Linda, the ongoing leadership election in the Tory party, the car crash of the Titans, is continuing at pace at a time when apparently the Chancellor and the Prime Minister are away and communicating by WhatsApp. Now, it struck me that Johnson will have a great deal more time on his hands after the 6th of September when he handed over to Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak as leader of the party and as Prime Minister. But that's only a month away, but he's decided to go on honeymoon now. Does that give us some insight into what Boris Johnson's priorities are and have always been?
Absolutely, Andrew. I have long since ceased to be surprised at some of the things that both Boris Johnson and his close team of cronies do. Like you, my first thought was, well, even the marriage celebration and all the rest of it, I thought, just wait until you're not the Prime Minister any longer. You know, um, apart from the contempt he's showing to everybody about that and now being away on honeymoon, there's no personal dignity there either. It's absolutely appalling. And yes, when he's no longer Prime Minister, nobody's going to give a monkey's a toss if he goes away on holiday for a month. You know, yes, he wouldn't be carrying out his MP duties, but he hasn't been doing that anyway. The whole thing is just amazing, and it's marked all the way through the top rank of the Tory government. Every single one of them, including the two leadership contenders at the moment, are marked with not caring, not caring how it looks, not caring how they behave, um, and literally just looking out for themselves and their own little set. And it doesn't matter who's going to become leader. I don't think, though, either of them would be quite as blatantly contemptuous as Boris Johnson has been so often, but that contempt is still there. It shows in Richie Sunak having been outed in his plans for taking money from deprived areas. It shows in Liz Truss the way she has spoken about the First Minister of Scotland and the First Minister of Wales, and the direction of travel of the UK government is very, very clear to me, regardless of who is leading it.
That's a good point that you make, Linda, in terms of the running of the government and the way in which
Yeah.
it's performing. It struck me firstly that perhaps with Johnson and others in the cabinet away, given their propensity that they've demonstrated over the last few years to spread crisis far and wide, everything that they touch turns to a crisis, every single thing.
Mm-hmm.
Given that if Johnson and others are away, and perhaps Larry, the number 10, the Downing Street cat, is running the country, do you think he'll do a better job?
Well, I don't think it would be hard to do a worse job, I have to say. I mean, I don't think it would be hard to do a worse job, I should say. It just seems like there's nobody in control. But you used the word there, Andrew, crisis, lurching from crisis to crisis. And I'm not convinced that there sometimes isn't a deliberate way of behaving with the UK government, which is deliberately to have crises ongoing. Because while you've got crises that everyone's talking about, you can do all the other stuff in the background. And when we look at the lack of, for example, the lack of publicity that is around what they're planning to do to the Human Rights Act, when you look at how really we've stopped talking in any big sense about the Northern Ireland Protocol, when you look at how the effects of Brexit that are deepening are not really reported and nobody's talking about them because everyone's running around talking about the crisis of the cost of living at the moment. People are talking today about the fact that both the Chancellor and the Prime Minister, arguably the most important representatives in the UK, have disappeared. Sometimes I think it suits because they can dig away at the background and do an awful lot of things that they're not being held to account for.
That's a very good point that you're making, Linda, in terms of the news agenda and the management of the news agenda.
Mhm.
As ever, we must remain sceptical and critical of what is and is not being done
Mhm.
on our behalf, if I can put it that way. But let's look at the
Definitely.
economic crisis from one particular perspective now, because the governor of the Bank of England has warned there was a risk of inflation becoming embedded if workers receive inflation matching pay rises. Andrew Bailey, who added that he does not expect interest rates to settle at pre-financial crisis levels of about 5%, refused to be drawn on what an appropriate pay rise would be. And that's a day after he warned that inflation will hit 13% in October. The bank's inflation target is 2%. The UK is facing a summer of strikes as workers in industries from rail and aviation to post and telecommunications, as unions attempt to secure increases to allow members to keep wages in line with inflation levels that are running at a 40-year high. Mr. Bailey acknowledged that as the UK heads into recession and inflation soars, it is the poorest who are being affected the most by the cost of living crisis. However, he warned that the UK has faced a domestic shock in the form of a shrinkage in the labour force over the last 2 years, causing widespread hiring problems, as well as soaring energy and food prices caused in part by the war in Ukraine, as well as supply chain problems caused by the COVID pandemic. For some reason, Mr. Bailey forgot to mention the effects of Brexit on the UK economy. Now, Linda, you mentioned Brexit a moment ago, but in terms of what Andrew Bailey was saying, and so we'll come back to that, but in terms of what Andrew Bailey was saying today, I remember that as recently as May, he gave evidence to the House of Commons saying that the war in Ukraine had caused an unpredictable jump in inflation and that there was, in his words, a major worry over food prices. And he described that major worry as apocalyptic. Now, yesterday, he's saying that folks shouldn't ask for enough money to maintain their standards of living. So, is he confused, or is this just a symptom that he and the Bank of England and the government are running after a problem that they simply cannot get a grasp on?
And I think that that last statement you made, Andrew, is probably right. That we're in a very, very new situation here. You outlined all the different things that have been happening, and indeed, some of them could be put down to Brexit as part of the cause, although that's not said. So, I mean, I wouldn't pretend to be an economist. I wouldn't pretend to have the solutions. But what does concern me is that I've been doing a lot of reading, and the absolutely opposing views that different economists have about where we should go from here is quite stark. And it shows me that we are in a new situation. Nobody really knows what the best way to deal with this is. But the background of all that, we have to recognise that most other advanced nations, when you look at the projections, are doing better than the UK is. So that's quite important. Maybe we should be learning more from them. And there's a lot of examples, for example, like France, take France, which is really helping people with the cost of energy. The UK isn't really that. So there's a lot of things can be done. There's a discussion that says more into the economy from people spending if possible. But what really, really gets to me is we have folk like the Governor of the Bank of England, we have um, multi-millionaire, billionaire politicians and all the rest of it saying, we cannot sustain these workers getting an increase even to half the rate of inflation, let alone the projected rate of inflation. But you never hear them saying, look at what shareholders are getting, or let's look at the salary and therefore wage rises and bonuses of those who are running big industries. And it's always the worker, as you said, the person at the bottom of the scale that gets kicked the most. It is always they who are told that they can't get a rise, they can't expect anything. And they're told that by the very, very privileged people who spend their lives expecting everything. And it's in government and it's right across the board. And it's part of that establishment that runs the UK that always look after themselves. I hope very much that people are starting to recognise this and realise this. I'm very, very impressed by a couple of trade union representatives who have been given a bit of media time over the last few months in relation to what a hard time workers are having. And I hope people are starting to recognise that we really are in a society where it's those and such as those who get all the time, those at the other end of the scale who get kicked and sat upon all the time. And I don't hold out much hope for the mainstream of the UK, if we look at population-wise and election-wise, which is, of course, England at the moment. But I very much hope that the likes of Scotland and the likes of Wales can show that things can be done differently and a better way forward. Now, some of that has been done. When you look at the child payment that the Scottish Government, with great difficulty, has been able to provide and also has increased. When you look at the mitigation that has been made by the Scottish Government, when you look at some of what's been done by the Welsh Government as well, which isn't even a government that believes in independence, they just believe in fairness. When you look at that, I hope that Scotland and Wales can give a view to how things can go forward. Of course, I think the best way that could be done would be for Scotland to be independent and show the rest of the UK that there is a neighbouring nation, a friend, which can do things differently. And I think that that is the best thing that could happen for all the component nations of the UK.
Thank you, Linda. That wrapped that story up very elegantly. I'm very grateful to you. Thank you. When you were speaking there, you mentioned the establishment. So let's have a look at an establishment story, because Keir Starmer has been found to have breached the MP's code of conduct by failing to register on time 8 interests, including gifts from football teams and the sale of a plot of land. An inquiry into the Labour leader was opened in June by the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner, Catherine Stone, relating to claims about the late declaration of earnings and gifts, benefits, or hospitality from UK sources. Speaking at the time, Starmer said he was absolutely confident that he had not broken the MP's code of conduct. The Commissioner has now found that the Leader of the Opposition failed to register 8 interests. That's 5 more than alleged in the original complaint. However, she noted that the breaches were minor and or inadvertent, and that there was no deliberate attempt to mislead. The watchdog therefore decided that the inquiry could be concluded by way of the rectification procedure without a referral to the Committee on Standards, which happens in more serious cases. The rectification procedure entails publishing the details and an apology on the House of Commons website. So, Linda, firstly, this finding that the breaches were minor and or inadvertent, and that there was no deliberate attempt to mislead, do you think that then suggests that we're seeing a case here of incompetence by Keir Starmer's office rather than deception?
Mm. Yeah, it's quite an interesting one. I mean, obviously, when I was in Scottish Parliament, we had the same sort of issues. And very many people, you're given so long to register something, etc., etc. And yeah, there's many times that people have inadvertently forgot to register it. I was trying there when you were talking to think of a time where I had done that. And I think maybe I did forget to register something fairly minor once, though I can't at the moment remember what it was. I was accused of a lot more, I have to say, that was never ever found to be valid, but that's a whole different issue. Um, you know, I think a lot about Keir Starmer. I mean, I don't particularly rate him. I think he's been a disappointment to the Labour Party, and I don't quite know what he stands for anymore. However, I've never thought of him as a man who was dishonest. I don't believe that he's a dishonest man and that he would go out to try and mislead. So it'll be interesting to see what these inadvertent breaches actually are when it's all published and things and see the detail. What does stun me though is that there's nobody looking after them. And that may sound quite weird, but whatever else I think about Keir Starmer, the man's got a lot on his plate. And he also has good office allowances as leader of the opposition. So I'm quite shocked that there is nobody there whose responsibility it is to make sure things like this don't happen to someone in such a prominent position. So, yes, you used the word incompetence, Andrew. Yeah, I think it's most bizarre. And maybe, I don't know, it's certainly not my place to say, but I think somebody in that office should be getting their bahookie well and truly kicked for that.
I think that's a very good way of putting it, Linda. Thank you. We'll come back to Scotland now for our next story, because one of Scotland's biggest community land buyouts is doubling to more than 10,300 acres, following a mammoth fundraising effort. The Dumfriesshire town of Langham has just succeeded in raising £2.2 million to buy 5,300 acres from the Duke of Buccleuch, one of Scotland's most powerful landowners. It will join the first similarly sized plot the community secured last year, thereby maximising the benefits of the Tarras Valley Nature Reserve for people, nature and climate on precious peatland. It has been touch and go for many months. On 31st of July was the deadline, but was extended by Buccleuch Estates from May. A £1 million grant from the Scottish Land Fund, a government fund for community takeovers like these, and a 242,000 public crowdfunder was topped up with three big donations this last week. Land reform in Scotland has made a sea change for communities which have been tenants for centuries. More than 200,000 hectares of Scottish land, that's about 3% of the land, is now under community ownership. So, Linda, firstly, the executive chairman of the Duke of Buccleuch's property business, Buccleuch Estates, the executive chairman, Benny Higgins, said, "We are absolutely delighted for the Langham initiative and have been pleased to work with them and support their project every step of the way. This successful outcome is testament to what can be achieved when people work together constructively." So I was just wondering, successful in what sense to the executive chairman of Buccleuch, of the Buccleuch Estates? Successful in terms of the Duke now has £5.5 million more, or
Aye.
£5.5 million worth of good publicity?
Well, I was sort of laughing there when Benny Higgins said I was absolutely delighted. Rah, rah, rah. I absolutely delighted at the money that's coming into the Duke of Buccleuch. And let's face it, he was never hard up to start with. It's not that he's had to sell an asset because he's needed the cash. Um, it's all been spun very positively by the Buccleuch Estates. I don't know a huge lot about it because it's not an area I represented, so it's very much in the periphery. What I do know is that I am a big proponent of community buyouts. I think the Scottish Government has done well in this, and the Land Fund giving money. So yes, I am very supportive of that. But there is still a great frustration with me there that the land is in the hands of so few people to start with. And when you look back at the history of how land was acquired and all the rest of it, I I think it would be a far better story for the aristocracy and others. It's not all aristocracy that own the land now. If they were to gift some of it back to communities, uh, rather than be lauding and applauding the fact that people are having to fundraise in order to buy out land.
That's something I wanted to ask you about, Linda. This was described as a success by the Buccleuch Estates, and they've been making much about what they describe as people working constructively together. And I wondered, do you think this is maybe an indication that the Duke is being relatively well advised, because this might suggest that while he is able to be paid for land that is passed into community hands, he should be seen to be working with the communities and with those who fund the communities, because the direction of travel is that if a great deal more land reform does not come into place in Scotland very quickly, the calls to rectify what is the most concentrated ownership of land in any country in Western Europe. We have the smallest number, I think 50 people own, 450 people own about half the country, I think. The steps to change that extreme concentration will become more direct, and the chances of being paid for the land will be less.
Well, I think there's probably a degree of pragmatism there. And let's face it, these guys like the Duke of Buccleuch and others, they get the best advice possible. They always do. They know exactly what to do, whether it be how to manage their money in terms of taxes paid and everything else, resources, grants. I have a memory actually of some years ago of there'd been a bit of a fight going on about land owned by the Duke of Buccleuch down that way and about the way it was being used. So the Duke of Buccleuch is a good example of a landowner who has gone from being a bit of uh, somebody who's criticised an awful lot for not really being into community use and all the rest of it, to suddenly doing this turnaround and is a great friend of the common person all of a sudden. Um, and a great philanthropist, isn't it fabulous? Look what I'm doing with this land. No, you're selling the land. You've got a lot of good PR on board now. You're taking good advice. And yes, I do think that there is a degree of writing on the wall here, and now may well be the optimum time to divest ourselves of surplus. Um, and that's what they do. That's what they've always done. An eye out for the main chance. Let's not kid ourselves.
Yes, absolutely, Linda. Money goes to money, apart from anything else. But let's look at another story now, which relates to something else, where the time has come and the writing is clearly on the wall, because the US is, following decades of political rancor and fossil fuel industry obfuscation, on the verge of its first significant attempt to tackle the climate crisis. Experts say it will help rewire the American economy and act as an important step to averting disastrous global heating. Independent analysis of the proposed legislation, known as the Inflation Reduction Act, shows it should slash America's planet heating emissions by about 40% by the end of the decade, compared with 2005 levels. This cut would bring the US within striking distance of a goal set by Joe Biden to cut emissions in half by 2030, a target that scientists say must be achieved by the whole world if catastrophic global heating, triggering escalating heat waves, droughts, and floods, is to be avoided. The climate provisions in the legislation, totaling $369 billion to be exact, are pared back from what Biden initially wanted. Excruciating negotiations with Joe Manchin, the coal company owning West Virginia senator, and a swing vote for the bill ended up in a reduced compromise. The Democratic Senator Brian Schatz said that despite the compromise, the bill can still be considered by far the biggest climate action in human history. Biden said the bill was a huge step forward. With all 50 Democrats, including Kristen Sinema, supporting it, the bill will overcome any Republican resistance to acting on the climate emergency, and billions of dollars will go towards investments in renewable energy such as wind and solar, rebates for people wishing to buy electric cars, and support for households to make them run on clean electricity and become more energy efficient. In sum, the bill will cut US emissions by between 31 and 44% below 2005 levels by 2030. That's according to the Rhodium Group, which is a non-partisan research firm. Now, Linda, it struck me that we're being told a great deal that Joe Biden's approval ratings are at rock bottom and in some cases are worse than his predecessor. However, despite the House being divided 50-50, and so relying on casting votes from the Vice President and the Speaker, we're seeing Joe Biden making progress, albeit reduced, but making progress with the Inflation Reduction Act. So does that tell us that, in fact, Joe Biden is managing to deliver on some of his promises and some of his policies, especially with regard to the climate.
It seems to be. Yeah, I mean, it's good news for all. It's a compromise, and it's still fairly ambitious. When you look at the sort of natural US aversion to anything green, I'm talking about amongst the general population, more concentrated in some of the states than in others. It's still ambitious. So yeah, I think he's done really well to get this far. I think he's obviously got a very good team behind him who seem to work very well together. You mentioned the last administration, and one of the things that for me seems quite marked is that they just seem to get on with it, whereas the last administration, uh, it was an awful lot of sound bites, sound and fury signifying nothing at the end of the day, um, except for some really vile populist things that got shoved through, and then people realising afterwards that the detail hadn't been properly worked out and it wasn't going to work and it was all a bit of a disaster. What Biden and his team seem to do is to work very hard to get something right and then make the announcement and it goes ahead. So, yeah, I think there's a lot more to him and his team than would be popularly thought until you look into it a bit further.
That's a good point that you make, Linda. And thinking about if we can compare UK politics and US politics, I'm certainly struck on a daily basis that the current UK government is all about fighting culture wars on the front pages of the Daily Mail and the Daily Express, and everything else
Mhm,
that they say that they try and do, actual implementation of policy, turns into a crisis or doesn't happen at all. So it's all
mhm,
about noise and fury, as you say, and not about
mhm,
actually delivering policies and making a difference. So, do you think if voters in the US can see that they now have a government and a president who deliver things rather than stir up dissent and concern only about TV ratings, do you think there's a chance that UK voters might begin to dawn on them as well that we have the same problem here?
I certainly hope so. I mean, as far as the climate's concerned, I think the recent uh, heat wave, weather changes, it's been happening in the US and in Australia, but even worse on mainland Europe. And for the first time in the British Isles, we didn't have it too badly up here, but I understand it was just hellish down south. Um, I think that's been a bit of a wake up call for people that have started to realise that we cannot sustain what we're doing. And I think too, there will be a recognition after this ridiculous leadership contest is out the way and there's perhaps a semi functioning government again. When you look at what the Tories and the leadership contenders are talking about doing, they're pulling back on some of the Green Initiative stuff despite the talk when you look behind the figures. There's a lot of great announcements, but the recent Climate Change Committee report showed that the implementation has not kept pace. So I think when people start to recognise that and the effect that climate change is having on their own communities now, I think that will make a difference and people will start to demand beyond the soundbite, beyond the stuff in the front of the paper every day. I also think Boris Johnson was very good at doing the front page of the paper stuff. And whilst I've never understood it, I think it's a fact that there's a portion of the population, after all, the man and his party did get re-elected. There's a portion of the population who looked at him with a degree of uh, affection, almost. That sort of bumbling buffoon, but really clever, actually, persona that I think is deliberate. Um, I think there was a lot of people fell for that, and so Boris got away with an awful lot more than your average person would in that position. And I think it'll be very different. Everybody's saying Liz Truss is going to win the contest, but either of them, I don't think we'll have that, call it charisma if you like, though as I say, I'd never ever saw it myself, um, charisma that Boris Johnson appeared to have as Prime Minister, which allowed him to get away with more. I don't think either Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak will get away with more, not just from the general population, but indeed from their own troops. I think it'll be quite interesting to see how the Tory Parliamentary Party deal with the new leader, the wider Tory party, and indeed the electorate.
Absolutely. Thank you, Linda. I'm sure that you and I will be discussing those points very soon
Yeah.
as we learn who the next Prime Minister will be.
Mhm.
But let's move to international news now, because Japan's Prime Minister, Fumio Kishida-san, has condemned Chinese military drills near Taiwan as a grave problem and a threat to regional peace and security. That's after 5 ballistic missiles landed inside Japan's exclusive economic zone. Speaking after a meeting with the US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi in Tokyo on Friday, Kishida-san said China's live fire exercises near the self-governed island must stop immediately. Beijing announced 4 days of drills that are expected to finish on Sunday. The drills are a serious problem that impacts our national security and the safety of our citizens, Kishida-san told reporters. China is Japan's biggest trading partner, but the countries have traded verbal blows over the Senkakus, uninhabited islands in the East China Sea that are administered by Japan but claimed by China, where they are known as the Diao. While Tokyo is keen not to antagonize Beijing, its role in hosting tens of thousands of US troops, most of them based on the southern island of Okinawa, could see Japan playing a key role in any crisis in the Taiwan Strait. 5 Chinese missiles appear to have landed in Japan's economic zone off Hataruma, an island far south of Japan's main islands, with 4 believed to have flown over Taiwan's main island. The zone extends up to 200 nautical miles from the country's coastline, beyond the limits of its territorial waters. Kishida-san said that he and Pelosi were committed to a free and open Indo-Pacific, a reference to increasingly assertive military activity by China in the South and East China Seas. Pelosi said that China must not be allowed to isolate Taiwan by preventing US officials from travelling to the island. So, Linda, it seems that we have an international crisis now. We have an international crisis in the shape of an illegal war of aggression in Europe. And now we have significantly increased tensions on the other side of the world around Taiwan and the Taiwan Straits and the East China Sea. Do you think that that these events and the saber rattling by China is an indication, perhaps, that they want to make sure that their place on the league of undemocratic countries which threaten violence to its neighbours, that they maintain their place in that league table just behind Russia?
Oh, well, perhaps that means something to them. Oh, I mean, Taiwan, China has been an ongoing dispute, decades. I think it's very important to China to always, you know, to always have the world believe that they are capable of an awful lot. I think it's also very important to them that they never lose face. Like any insult is taken very, very badly. I think it's part of the psyche. Now, I used to see it on a very, very minor level when I was an elected politician, because I was the convener for a long time of the Scottish Parliament group on Tibet, because I believe that Tibet is illegally occupied by China. And every time I said something publicly, or we had an event in Parliament, I would get a visit from the Chinese consul. And I think once the Chinese ambassador came up from London. So they're on to everything. Any insult, real or perceived, is acted upon and dealt with. It's usually just a wee chat, no threats. I don't mean for a minute I was ever threatened or anything. I was just told that I was misguided, you know. And so they're on to everything. Nothing gets away. And if you scale that up and you look at, China as the nation and those who lead it, the fact that Nancy Pelosi showed friendliness to the Taiwanese is a problem and an insult to China because they believe that that island should be theirs. Therefore, they have to, I think you used the expression saber rattle, Andrew. They have to have the world see that they don't take things lightly. I mean, why Nancy Pelosi went, I'm not at all sure. I mean, I'm sure she had very good motivation for it. It was a bit of US saber rattling as well. Saying, look, we can do what we like. We're not frightened of China. China might be sort of not coming out totally against Russia at the moment, but we're going to show. I know it was said that she was advised not to go and all the rest of it, but who knows what's going on in the background in diplomatic circles. You can't think for a minute everything we read is the fact. So I think there's a bit of positioning going on both with the US and with China. Taiwan has agreed to allow themselves to be part of that. So there's decisions being taken right across the board.
I'm just hearing you now. My apologies, Linda. I had a problem at this end, but I think it's fixed. Can you hear me?
Ah, right.
There
Yes,
we go. No,
absolutely. I
we're
hope you
still
don't
running
want
here.
me to repeat all that again, Andrew.
That wouldn't be fair. My apologies. There was a very brief gremlin here, but I think we've dealt with it. Let's move on now to the next story this evening, because the jury in Alex Jones's defamation trial on Thursday ordered the far-right conspiracy theorist to pay $4.1 million in damages over his repeated claims that the deadly Sandy Hook school shooting was a hoax. Jurors in Austin, Texas gave their verdict after deliberating about 1 hour Wednesday and 7 hours on Thursday at the end of a 9-day-long trial. The verdict levied against Jones was far below the $150 million or more the plaintiffs had requested that jurors award them. In a statement on behalf of the parents of a 6-year-old Sandy Hook victim whose lawsuit set the trial in motion, the attorney Mark Bankston said, "Mr. Jones will not sleep easy tonight." Bankston said that his clients Neil Heslin and Scarlett Lewis were thrilled with the result and looked forward to putting Mr. Jones's money to good use. In a separate phase today, jurors are to determine whether Jones owes any punitive damages in addition to the compensation he was ordered to pay on Thursday. With punitive damages still to be decided and multiple other pending legal matters, it is clear that Mr. Jones's time on the American stage is finally coming to an end, Bankston added. Heslin and Lewis, whose son Jesse Lewis was killed during the mass shooting, took the stand during the trial and detailed their mental suffering, the death threats, and harassment they weathered from fringe conservatives after Jones went on the right-wing conspiratorial outlet InfoWars, as well as other media platforms, to trumpet lies that the 20 children and 6 adults murdered in the 2012 Connecticut school massacre never actually died. In his own testimony, Jones now apologizes and concedes that the 2012 massacre at the elementary school in Newtown, Connecticut was 100% real. So, Linda, without looking at the legal aspects of this, the trial is still ongoing insofar as the jury has yet to determine punitive damages. The responsibility of, or rather the irresponsibility of right-wing media pundits and shysters is a problem in the UK too. Do you think that the deregulation of the media, especially the radio in the US, which has allowed characters like Jones to operate with impunity, do you think that rather than dragging them through the courts for defamation from time to time, that it would be better that the UK media regulators refresh their regulatory regime in order to protect against the rise of characters like Jones, but broadcasting and communicating here in the UK?
Oh, it's a huge question, Andrew. It is so difficult because, on one hand, you believe in freedom of speech, of course we do. And then, we've all heard of oppressive regimes. The first thing they do is shut down radio stations, stop people speaking, jail journalists, So there's always the thin end of the wedge stuff. It's really, really hard. I mean, the likes of Alex Jones and others it fascinates me because I think to myself, did that guy really believe the stuff he was saying? Or is he such an ethics and morality free zone that he doesn't mind hurting people for his own personal ends and what he sees as personal aggrandizement? Really puzzling. But when you come to the bit you're saying, then what do you do in the UK about that? I think there has to be a degree of regulation, but it has to be very, very light touch. You can't have governments deciding what's acceptable and what's not. Now, we do have quite a lot of good legislation that's there and good practice that's there in terms of, for example, hate crimes and everything else, deliberately going out to hurt other groups. They don't necessarily cover things like, can you imagine if somebody had come on and said that the Dunblane school massacre wasn't real? We'd be horrified, but I don't know what we could actually have done about it. So it's a very, very difficult thing to try and regulate. I do think it would be good to have smart folk that are involved in this stuff, human rights lawyers too, and other people like that, forming some kind of, I hesitate to use committee because then you think nothing ever gets done, but a study that says how we can possibly look at this stuff. I mean, we've all been talking for years about social media, for example, but it's now, if you start looking at regulating social media, you should also be looking at other media. And we look at all these wee things in isolation and put sticking plasters on it instead of doing it properly. So I think we have to be very, very vigilant, both in terms of what is acceptable to go out on airwaves, but also in terms of who makes the decisions to stop stuff going out in the airwaves.
Completely, Linda. As you say, a question of balance, and for those, and to continue to remain vigilant in terms of making sure that everyone's rights are looked after. Now, let's
Mm-hmm.
return to Scotland for our next story, because to mark the 75th anniversaries of the Edinburgh International Festival, Edinburgh Festival Fringe, and the Edinburgh International Film Festival, £2.1 million in Scottish Government funding will support anniversary programmes. This year's Edinburgh International Festival will include a special appearance of the Ukrainian Freedom Orchestra, and that'll be one of 3 free concerts, including the opening and closing events, staged thanks to this additional funding. A showcase of the largest Made in Scotland event at the Fringe will demonstrate the best in homegrown talent, with 27 artists, companies, and ensembles performing. The Edinburgh International Film Festival, which is back in its August slot for the first time in over a decade, includes a lineup of over 80 new feature films. Our Culture Secretary, Angus Robertson MSP, said, "The culture sector is renowned for its creativity and resilience, so I'm delighted to see the Edinburgh Festivals back with ambitious and diverse programmes following the pandemic." So, Linda, one thing strikes me there in terms of the way in which the festival operates in Edinburgh, and that's that there is the international aspect. I've spoken there about the
Mm-hmm.
performance by the Ukrainian Freedom Orchestra, which is at the Usher Hall tonight, I think, or tomorrow,
All right.
and at the same time, there's a large Made in Scotland component at the Fringe with homegrown talent, 27 artists, companies, and ensemble. So it's always struck me that one of the things that the festivals do is bring together Scottish people and Scots and people visiting from all around the world in order to both make and enjoy other people's creative efforts. So do you think, is that kind of bringing together of people something which the Scottish Government and the festival should do more of in order to encourage the meeting of minds and the exchanging of views?
I think the Scottish Government, and actually, what I would say here is, I think since devolution, right from the start of devolution, regardless of who's been in government, there has been a recognition of the importance of the festivals right across the board. I think it, it started to increase more under the current SNP government, because that was when there was funding very much given to the Made in Scotland brand as well, because that's so important. And it's not just about the coming together in August. That stuff all contributes to the soft diplomacy, if you like, um, of culture and the arts being used internationally. So it's very, very important from an economic as well as a cultural and well-being of a nation point of view. We've had some great successes over the years. And we send our orchestras, for example, all around the world. We've sent plays. The National Theatre of Scotland has been a huge success. So it's been a real blow in all these terms, the COVID issue over the last few years. So I'm really pleased to see that there's been additional funding put in by the Scottish Government this year to the festivals as well. And, we always hear the talk about, oh, it's a pain in the neck in Edinburgh in August and all the rest of it, blah, 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 blah. But it's not as vibrant, it's wonderful. Yes, it can be frustrating for folk trying to get around their day-to-day life, but it's not as if it's not something that's expected. It's been happening in Edinburgh for decades, and um, it benefits the whole of Scotland in these terms. And one other thing I would say, there's a lot of talk every time a festival comes round of, oh, it's only for those and such as those, and ordinary folk. The People's Festival was started decades ago by the traditional music sector and Scottish artists, and it has kept up. And Colin Fox revived it a few years ago, along with other people. But do you know what? There has always been, as part of the Fringe, events that go out beyond the city centre of Edinburgh and go to other places, and people tap into it. It's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful cultural exercise. And I, for one, I'm looking forward to going through next week. Got a couple of things planned. You talk about Scottish talent. Well, things I've got planned are the wonderful William Dalrymple is appearing at the book festival, and I'm such a fangirl when it comes to William Dalrymple. I'm actually hoping to get to shake hands, say hello. I'm that woman that follows you on Twitter all the time. And he's wonderful. And the other person I'm looking forward to seeing in the Fringe is Susie McCabe, because she's somebody that I've heard on the radio so often, thought she's fabulous, and I'm really going to try and catch her as well. So there's Book Festival, the Fringe. I'm going to sit this weekend and look through all the brochures and see what else I can find to do. Looking forward to it.
Fantastic, Linda. Thank you. I'd forgotten that I did know, but I'd forgotten that William Dalrymple is at the book festival. I must go and try and get tickets because I
Are
wouldn't
you a
describe him as a fan.
fanboy, Andrew?
I'm not a fangirl. I'm a fanboy of Dalrymple's work. I've read all of his books and taken a number of them to heart in my dealings in India over the years. But let's move to another aspect, another thing that is close to your heart, Linda, because today marks the 40th anniversary. And when I say that, I mean in terms of the built environment. Today marks the 40th anniversary of the Keswick Bridge. The iconic crossing over the Beaulieu Firth was formally opened by the Queen Mother on Friday, the 6th of August, 1982. Measuring over 1,000 metres in length, the link between Inverness and the Black Isle took 4 years and to build at a cost of about £25 million. That's about £100 million today. The harp-type cable-stayed crossing was an ambitious project incorporating seismic buffers to mitigate any movement in the Great Glen Fault. It was given a Saltire Society Civil Engineering Award in 1983 and has been listed as a Category B structure in 2019, recognising the bridge's unique architectural and technical features. Our Minister for Transport, Jenny Gold-Ruth, said, "The Keswick Bridge has become an iconic part of Scotland's road network, with 335 million vehicles estimated to have used it over the past 40 years. The crossing has not only helped to cut journey times, but it has also been recognised for its technical and architectural merits, so it's fitting that we mark its 4 decades of service. The Scottish Government will invest £33 million in the years ahead to make sure that the Keswick Bridge continues to play a vital role in the future." So, Linda, it may seem slightly curious that we're celebrating a bridge. However, the construction of bridges and the investment in transport infrastructure in Scotland is, I think, often one of the most obvious ways in which the Scottish government is able to improve people's lives.
Mhm.
Anytime
Mhm.
I fly out of Edinburgh Airport and I can see the Forth Road Bridge, the Forth Rail Bridge, and the Queensferry Crossing lined up one at a time, it makes the point that in Scotland we don't build walls, we build bridges. So do you think we do you I was going to ask you, where do you think our next priority should be in terms of investing in this kind of infrastructure? The biggest project I think underway at the moment is the completion of the dualling of the A9. Where would you like to see the Scottish government pay attention in terms of transport infrastructure next?
Oh my goodness, that's a heck of a question to throw at me, Andrew. You know, yeah. I mean, there's a big issue with the road down to Stranraer. I think that's one that certainly needs looked at. There's been improvements made over the years, but nothing great. But I think something that often gets forgotten is if we look at some of the roads in the Highlands. Um, Now, under Strathclyde Regional Council and stuff, and European funding, and let's not forget that,
Mhm.
there was some good roadworks done. I would think of the likes of Argyll. But there's a lot of places being opened up to tourism now that doesn't have good road infrastructure. Now, I'm not talking about whacking dual carriageways or anything through. But when you look, what is it we call it, the 500 up through Caithness and stuff,
The NC,
that's
the
there just
NC 500, yes.
500, yeah. Um, I know there's issues, and it's about some of the passing places not being great. Being able to widen a wee bit here and there, but keep the character. And I was recently in Argyll actually, heading up to Loch Sween from Lochgilphead. And I was so impressed. First time I'd ever used that road, and I was so impressed by how well done it was through that whole area. Single track road, great passing places, all within the character of the land and keeping it that way. So I think we can do a lot more thinking around that rather than always thinking that you have to be whacking in dual carriageways and everything else. And I think along with that has to go a lot of public education about how to drive properly in these roads, because another of the issues is people that just don't drive properly on them.
That's a very
So
good point,
that's
Linda.
what I would.
There's definitely plenty of work to be done there. Thank you. But
Mhm.
looking at the clock, I can see that that has to be our final item because that's all that we have time for this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs, and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes, to develop the station, and to make new programmes for you. If you're able to support us, then please subscribe or donate to Broadcasting Scotland. You will find the link to do that on the screen now. You will see and you will hear that our continued requests for financial assistance are continuing because the need for financial support has not gone away. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. You can find us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot. You can find us on Facebook by searching for Broadcasting Scotland. And when you're watching us on YouTube, it would be great if you would like and subscribe to Broadcasting Scotland on that platform. Meantime, I will be here again on Sunday with the next edition of the Full Scottish, so please tune in and join us again then. And that's the way it is at very nearly Scotland at 8. So a very special thanks to our very special guest, Linda Fabiani. Thanks, Linda. Thanks, Linda. In the past, this was the time of year for fighting. There was the Battle of Maserfield on the 5th of August in 642, and there was the Battle of Otterburn in 1388. We won't be fighting here, so I hope that you have a peaceful weekend. You can tell that this programme has been pre-recorded because of the clock in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. But it's been great to have Linda Fabiani join us to discuss the news and culture from Scotland and around the world this evening. I hope you have a very peaceful weekend and join us again here on Broadcasting Scotland very soon. Bye bye.